So who are our esteemed panelists? First, we have Giles Peddy. Giles has been the Group Managing Director UK at LEWIS since 2013. He is responsible for the UK's complete portfolio of services and capabilities, as well as leading many global initiatives as a member of the global management team. During his career, he has worked for high-growth companies as well as blue-chip brands including Citrix, Costa Coffee, Infosys, Jabra, McAfee, Oracle, Pret a Manger, Samsung, SAS, and Turkish Airlines. Giles was a member of the AMEC working group that recently developed the new integrated evaluation framework, and LEWIS built the online tool for AMEC as part of its commitment to better measurement. Our second panelist is Richard Bagnall. Richard is a 20-year veteran of the PR and communications measurement industry. He was co-owner and MD of Metrica for 18 years, then led it sail to Gorkana, where he remained as MD of Global Insights for an additional 5 years. In 2014, he joined the Global Communications Measurement Specialist Prime Research, where he leads the company's traditional and social media measurement consultancy practice throughout Europe. Richard is board director and the chair-elect of AMEC, where he recently led the launch of the Integrated Communication Evaluation Framework. As a member of the Cabinet Office Evaluation Council, Richard advises government departments and arm's-length bodies on effective communications measurement techniques. At the invitation of the Government Communication Service, Richard co-authored the UK government's Digital Communications Review, the findings of which, having been accepted, are now being implemented. Without further ado, I hand the time over to Giles and Richard.
Well, hello everybody, and good afternoon and good morning to those joining from America. Thank you very much, Johna, for your kind words. This is Richard Bagnall speaking. Thank you to everybody in the audience for being with us, and I'd just like to reiterate our thanks to LEWIS for very kindly sponsored and are hosting today's webinar. So like many of you on the call, I'm also an ex-PR, and I used to work both in-house and also at PR agencies, and it was while I was at a PR agency that my interest in measurement really got sparked. We were working for the launch of the National Lottery in the UK back in the mid-1990s. I'd received a very early media measurement report and took it into the client full of confidence with the big numbers that it showed. But in fact, what the report did was create more questions than it did solve answers, and I had a very awkward meeting. And that really spurred my interest in measurement. And with a piece of serendipity, I met Mark Westerby, who was to found Metrica, and I was able to go on a journey with him as the company's managing director. But if we can think back to those early days of measurement in the 1990s, it was a greenfield site, as we used to call it. If we were winning new clients, they weren't from competitors. They were people who were new to measurement, and there weren't many competitors either. There were just 4 or 5 different companies operating in the field. And we used to go to pitches, and the way that we differentiated ourselves was with different metrics and different scoring systems and our own various different sources. They were great for us because they helped to give the companies unique selling points. But what we all realized was they were really bad for the industry as a whole, because what we were basically doing was confusing the marketplace. Everybody in those days was doing content analysis, some media analysis of basically press cuttings back in the 90s, but we were confusing the marketplace. So happily, a group of us came together and discussed the need for a trade association that would be able to help grow the market and educate the market with a consistent voice about best practice. And that's where the early days of AMEC came from in the sort of mid to late 1990s. And some of the companies, I'm afraid none of whom basically exist anymore, but companies like Media Measurement, Echo Research, and of course Metrica have all gone on to be consumed by other businesses. They were the ones we got together, just 4 or 5 UK businesses, used to sit around in each other's boardrooms and dream of big things. But from those small beginnings about how we could create this trade association, something really rather marvelous has grown. And AMEC today is the world's largest measurement and insights trade body. We've got over 150 members in 86 countries across the world. And no longer is it just content analysis businesses, but we've got market research members, we've got PR agencies, in-house, not-for-profits and government departments, all agreeing with us of the need for consistent, credible voice on how to do measurement with best practice. And today's event, of course, is part of one of those educational initiatives, which is Measurement Month. This year's Measurement Month is the biggest ever. We've got over 62 events running across the world, and we're grateful to you all for joining in. Some of the different initiatives that we've run, hopefully, will ring bells with you and you'll be familiar with. So back in 2009, we conceived, and in 2010, came out with the Barcelona Principles. A couple of years later, we wanted to give advice on how to operationalize them. How can you bring these principles and make them real? So we launched the Valid Metric Framework. A couple of years after that, social media had got a really hot issue in terms of how to measure it. So we came up with some best practice advice on that with the social media measurement frameworks. Then a lot of work on user guides and how-tos. In 2015, we relaunched the Barcelona Principles as Barcelona Principles 2.0, bringing them into the language and reflecting the way that the communications and the PR industry has moved on. And of course, this year, and the purpose of today is to talk about the Integrated Evaluation Framework, which we've launched, which is there to replace all of these things. So why did we create the Integrated Evaluation Framework? Well, of course, PR and communications have moved on significantly since those early days. No longer, if it ever was, are we just working as media relations as a route to our audience. We're working across paid, earned, shared, and owned media. And I think that I'm sure will be a concept familiar to everybody. Here's, I think, a lovely image that Ginny Dietrich at Spin Suts put together, which visualizes those different channels or tactics, if you like, and the routes to the audience on one slide. So the best practice for measurement now then is that we need to measure holistically, not just earned media, but across all of these different channels if we're going to give a credible measurement of the work that we're doing. And in many ways, the rise of digital media has somehow seemed to make this easier. We'll all be familiar, I'm sure many of you get called by salesmen with their fantastic dashboards. They're often software as a service, and they've got pretty charts, pretty dashboards, and they're making bigger and bigger promises about what they can count, what they can capture, and what they can measure, and promises of measuring return on investment for you and all of this kind of stuff. But I worry that this is going to potentially confuse the marketplace again, as it did in those early days that I was talking about of the media evaluation companies. What we've got to be careful is that we don't just count what's easy to count, but that we measure what really matters. And I want to tell a story of a real case study that I think highlights this point nicely. If we go back a few years to about 2010, 2011, Pepsi had been doing incredibly well in the Coke against Coca-Cola. In fact, they had forced Coke into a rebrand, and Pepsi was a strong number 2 challenger brand and was snapping at the heels of Coca-Cola. Buoyed with this confidence, they decided to do something pretty radical. For the first time in 23 years, they cancelled their prime advertising slot on the Super Bowl and instead took the $20 million budget that cost to advertise and put it into effectively a massive corporate social responsibility project, which they branded as Pepsi Refresh. And what Pepsi Refresh was an idea where they wanted to get their community and their audience to provide ideas to them on how Pepsi could positively improve their community. So people could vote for different projects, campaigns, worthy causes that Pepsi should donate some money to. And this would engage with their audience, it would drive conversation, and to many, in many ways, I think was a fabulous idea, and massive kudos to Pepsi for trying it. When they did the traditional measurements of it, the numbers were off the charts. Here are just some of those numbers. I think if any of us, those of us working in measurement ourselves, writing reports, or those of us in-house or receiving a report with these type of numbers, would be thrilled. They got 2.9 billion impressions, 3.5 million likes on Facebook, which is an increase of over 600%, loads of tweets, loads of new followers, and you can see them measuring their own media there as well, 17 million unique views and 80 million votes. These, of course, are what we call, well, most of these are what we call output metrics. In terms of outtakes, their brand attributes also increased. So they measured their brand attribute values, and those were also increasing. So measured like this campaign was an enormous success. But when turned into the language of the business, Pepsi was crushed. During this time period, they suffered a 5% decline in their market share, which equated to $500 million of lost revenue. They slipped from the number 2 brand that they'd worked so hard to achieve to the number 3 brand behind Diet Coke. To rectify the situation, they had to spend $600 million on above-the-line marketing. They also had to take drastic action, and they slashed 8,700 jobs, and included in that was the job as a marketing director, Massimo D'Amore. Now, I don't want that type of thing to happen to us in our industry. If you just stop at focus at the output only metrics, the content analysis metrics only, these are the risks that we're taking. And this is why it's so critical that we do two things, that we focus on moving from outputs only to looking at outtakes and beyond that outcomes, and that we also, of course, work across paid, earned, shared, and owned. Because after all, what is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to get the right message. Nothing here has changed, by the way, over all the years I've been working in measurement. We're trying to get the right message to the right audience in the right channel. That's where it's changed a bit now. We've got the paid, earned, shared, and owned, but still trying to reach that audience, and for a reason, and that's to achieve an objective. In Pepsi's case, that objective obviously is to sell more Pepsi, to maintain market share, to drive a share price. And in all of our different organizations, we'll have our own specific objectives, but they're business or organizational objectives. They're not able to be measured just by output numbers alone. So that's where the integrated evaluation framework comes from. It's saying that we're not going to look at measuring in silos anymore. We're not going to do traditional media monitoring and analysis in one bucket and social media monitoring and analysis in another bucket, and we're going to do owned media in another department. We need to bring all of this together to really tell the story of how our communicators are helping their organization to achieve its objectives. And I'm going to hand over now to Giles Peddy, who will tell us a little bit more about the framework.
So thank you, Richard, for that introduction. So by way of context to the integrated evaluation framework, Richard's painted the picture of, the techniques and how everything has changed, how many organizations were in a silo with PR and digital and marketing all acting independently, but how those silos were starting and are starting to break down as people start to deliver more integrated work. And indeed, the measurement frameworks that existed before the new one very much focused on individual activities. They weren't particularly integrated. They didn't really address paid, earned, shared, and owned in a collective and integrated fashion. But to do our jobs effectively nowadays, whether that's an account executive or a board director, whether that's in a commercial organization or a public sector organization, we do need to plan more effectively, measure our communications in a much more integrated way, and not just in, as the Pepsi example showed, in metrics, in numbers, but actually in organizational objectives. How is that campaign supporting the organization Is it getting more votes? Is it selling more widgets or soft drinks in the case we just saw, or something else? Because in today's age, to prove the value of communication, we must move beyond simple vanity metrics. And that's where we came about, because communication professionals have to show the impact their work has on the organization. When I am talking with my clients, I'm simply asking, how can we support your business more effectively? That is the question we are asked, and it is the question we need to answer every day. So the integrated evaluation framework was born out of this sort of mission to bring everything together in a more integrated fashion. And as Richard has so clearly articulated, AMEC has been championing better measurement for many years, and the Barcelona principles, and indeed the previous incarnation of valid metrics, are very good examples of their efforts to do that. And it has started the momentum. But AMEC and many of its partners and associates and people who are strong advocates for better measurement recognized that a new solution did need to come out. And so AMEC set up a working group with people from across the commercial and public sector, from Gorkana and Prime, including obviously Richard led the working group from Prime Research. We also had the Government Communication Service, people from there in the UK. We had an academic from the University of Sydney, who's now at the London School of Economics. And indeed, LEWIS came to the table as well to build and spent a year building out what good measurement could look like, both from a planning perspective to help you better plan your campaigns and programs, to then showing the execution and the work done across the paid, earned, shared and owned platforms, and then show the measurement impact, be it outputs, outtakes and business impact. And what that led us to is an interactive element to it. So previously it was very static, and we wanted to create a platform that allowed individuals to go through a process from phase 1 through to phase 7. We wanted it to be very easy for individuals to understand, and so we built a platform that allowed you to follow a process, but also had a lot of information guides, some advice, and further listening, further reading materials in order to plan and measure programs more effectively. It was also very important that it was a credible approach for all sizes of organizations, whether big or small, or government, or public sector, or commercial. And importantly, that anyone could use it. Again, whether you're a graduate just coming out of university, or you're on the board of a large agency. It was simple and easy to use. But it's free and it's non-proprietary. And again, this is really important. We want the integrated evaluation framework to be adopted by every organization, every agency out there, and to make sure we are better planning and better measurement. And so now, with the launch of the integrated evaluation framework in June 2016 at the AMEC Summit in London, we do now have an integrated approach to the measurement challenges that we face today. And this new framework operationalizes the Barcelona principles that AMEC have been championing and turns the valid metrics model that has been initially been used as version 1.0 into a much more interactive platform that proves the value of our work at an organizational level. So here is what the integrated evaluation framework looks like when you land on the website. It's a tile-based system, so again, very easy to flow, starting here with objectives, then inputs, activity, outputs, outtakes, and outcomes, and finally, impact. And we've made it very simple to use, and and the people that have used it so far have already seen it's so simple to use that the adoption we're already seeing significant increase, and Richard will talk about that in a minute. So if we dive in a little bit further, if you click the objectives tile, this is what you'll see. You'll see organizational objectives. What are the broad objectives of your organization? And an eye icon. And if you click the eye icon, you see the white box to the right of it, organisation objectives. And here it gives you a little explanation. And if you needed further explanation, you click the link to click here, and it gives you a whole further range of information. But in this point here, organisation objectives, it could be to increase market share by 10%. It could be to sell, 30,000 widgets. It could be to get change a piece of legislation. It could be to get a piece of legislation changed, for example. Then underneath that, your organisation objectives, you have your communication objectives. What are the communication objectives to this program? How can my communication objectives support the selling of more widgets or getting more votes, for example? And that's where you start to articulate the linking between the organisational objectives and your communication objectives. Then I haven't gone through every single item here because of time, but what happens then is through inputs and activity, you then put, for example, strategic activities, backdrop to information, the budget that you have available. And in activity, it sounds exactly what you're going to do. But in outputs, this is where it gets quite interesting. It says, list the content, materials, and activities that you distributed or which your target audiences were exposed to. And here you can see the PESO model. So here you can click one of the P, E, S, or O, and then put some activities aligned, outputs aligned to that. Again, you want to mirror the activities you did with the outputs. So again, when you come to the end, you'll see how it's an integrated view. Now, of course, if you only did a paid program, or indeed it was just an earned program, that's fine. You can just click E, or vice versa, and you can mix and match. Again, that's why it's so flexible. And again, we gave you an eye icon to allow people to say what outputs are included here. Advertising, for example, publicity, website, for example, posts and videos, how many attended the events or webinars, for example, and sponsorship launch, what was the audience? And then you move through to the next section, and you fill it all in. And then you come to submitting, and this is what you can see. This is a blank one, but on the website are a load of examples of companies that have completed it. And you'll see, in fact, the NHS blood transfusion is a brilliant example of the objectives was to increase the number of donors within a certain demographic. The objectives was to align to that, target audiences, and what was their strategy behind that. And then they looked at the activity and output and outtakes. And in fact, they were able to deliver a business impact. But what you can see in this form is a simple one-page guide and measurement framework that allows you to plan your program from organizational objectives and communication objectives, all the way through your target audience, who you're trying to reach, what was your strategy to reach that audience, what activities did you conduct to reach that audience, to achieve your communication and organizational objectives. And then through measurement of what was the output, which was some of the measurements that Richard shared, for example, the Pepsi example, in terms of likes and things like that, to outtakes. What was the audience response to the campaign? What have they taken away from this piece of work that you've done? What was the outcome the audience have taken? Have they gone and voted? Have they gone and registered for sign-ups? Have they actually gone out and purchased? And ultimately, in the bottom right corner is the impact. Has your campaign achieved what you set out to achieve at the beginning? Has it achieved not only your communication objectives, which was maybe to increase share of voice by X to support selling 300,000 more widgets, but did it actually sell 300,000 widgets, or did it sell more cans of soft drinks? And that's where suddenly in one page, you're able to show quite clearly the way that you plan your program, the activities you did across an integrated format, and the impact it has had on your audience, and the impact it has had on your organization. And this framework is being adopted by LEWIS as our standard across our 27 global offices in our measurement approach. I know other agencies have also begun adopting this framework and are using it. The UK government is also using this type of methodology in all of their communication programs and their departments here in the UK. And I know that others are also seeing positivity. The initial response has been incredibly overwhelming, and Richard may chime in here in a second. But what is really noticeable is that across agencies, across consulting firms, across governments, people are embracing the integrated evaluation framework. They are using it because they can see how to better plan their programs, better manage their programs across the PESO model, and ultimately measure and show the evaluation against business impact. And so that's why everyone should be so excited and start using the integrated evaluation framework from AMEC, because it's very simple, it's free to use, it's there for anyone to tap into. It helps, it's very logical, there's lots of information, and it's been designed by some of the best measurement experts in the world. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Richard to summarize, and indeed any questions after that. But thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Giles, for that walkthrough. In terms of feedback, as Giles said, it's had incredibly positive feedback. We're grateful to LEWIS for their endorsement and for using it, and as you mentioned, many other PR agencies are also using it. I think it was important for us as well to not do this as AMEC in a silo, but to include other trade associations as well. So we consulted through the AMEC Advisory Board, Academic Advisory Board, which includes members from all over the world in different academic institutions, and also other PR trade associations. So we included and valued the contribution of organizations like the Institute for Public Relations in the United States. And everybody's been very positive about this being a nice, simple, consistent method that everybody can use, no matter how big your organization is, how big your budget is, that will help you think what it is that you're trying to achieve, help you understand what success would look like, set those targets, agree those targets internally, plan to run your campaign effectively, and then measure it in an appropriate manner. Of course, what that output of the tool itself produces, that one-page slide, on its own isn't enough. What we need you to do is to use the flow of the process and then tell your measurement story around it. So you need to then bring it to life about how you did your work, what it meant for the business, how it helped, and importantly, what you've learned, what perhaps didn't work as well as you had expected, and what you're going to be doing differently. And I can tell you that as I sit with the Cabinet Office Evaluation Council and we review different organizations, arms length bodies and government departments' work, communicators have come to they don't fear measurement, they don't fear coming to see the council. They actually relish it because it gives them a structured process to tell that story, to make learnings, and to ultimately be more effective and more efficient. I thank Giles and LEWIS at the beginning for hosting today's webinar, but I would just like to reiterate that LEWIS donated a large amount of their software development team's time and resource into building this integrated tool for us. And obviously, as a not-for-profit trade association, that was a significant contribution. So thank you to LEWIS for helping to devise it. Obviously, the main thing that we want you to do is to go and take a look at it and start using it. And rather than it just being just a tool on a single page on the website, we've deliberately built an entire microsite around it with a whole load of relevant and meaningful information for you to use. So there's a resource center with supporting material, all kinds of things, which I'd urge you to go and look at. One of the key things is a taxonomy of what does outputs mean, what does outtakes mean, what do outcomes mean, what type of metrics fit into each. So it really brings that to life. There's a dictionary of terms, there's case studies, there's white papers, and there's links if you're becoming a measurement geek and you're really wanting to drill into the subject. There's links to countless articles on reputation measurement and all of those kind of things. In terms of the worldwide support, organizations have rushed to say, this is so good, we want to use it in our markets. It's already been translated into I think about 7 different languages, including Dutch, Spanish, Arabic, Swedish, Slovenian, Macedonian, Bosnian, and we've got a whole load more coming very soon as well. So that I guess it's a summary that I wanted to add, and with that, perhaps I'll hand it back to Johna.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Giles. I think this is such a great resource for everyone, whether you have an existing successful measurement program and team, or you're just starting out, to really create and to utilize a program that's been implemented on your behalf is such a great resource. I really challenge everyone to be able to use that. We have a couple of questions. The first one is for Giles. Giles, you obviously are part of the global team there at LEWIS. Can you talk about the challenges and or the success that you've had with some of your clients in adopting the framework? And of those challenges that you've met, how have you kind of explained to them to be able to integrate this into the program? Sorry, a 3-part question. Of the clients, do you find that there's a higher adoption rate amongst government or a B2B or a B2C organization to be able to utilize this across their company?
Okay, so we've definitely seen, I mean, Richard will be, as obviously as the chairman of AMEC, will probably have a great understanding of adoption, but we've definitely seen a strong adoption of the AMEC integrated framework in governments, public sector. For example, the AMEC Gold Award, I think, or the Platinum Award, went to the NHS for their blood transfusion campaign, which was, and that case study is on the AMEC website as an example of how to, for the framework, and that was outstanding. But that said, and the UK government has standardised on a framework very, very similar to the integrated evaluation framework for all of their communication, 4,000 communication staff. So again, government has definitely, public sector has definitely adopted this, but commercial organisations have also adopted it. And I think one of your points was B2B or B2C. Well, it depends. Again, it comes back to what the organisation objectives, and it comes back to I think we're seeing many consumer brands improving their measurements at the events. We've heard McDonald's talk and UNICEF, and we've seen eBay talk. So we're definitely seeing consumer brands embrace measurement. And I think the other point was, I think, adapting the framework, I think was one of the questions as well, wasn't it? Absolutely. I think people can use it in different ways. I think that's why it's such a flexible, and that's why we built it in such a flexible way, but yet in a consistency of thinking. So you can use it for a single project, or you can use it for an ongoing campaign. But it's there to be used in different forms and different guises, but with the structure and the taxonomy on how to better measure within the framework. So I think that's why it's such a flexible and useful tool for anyone in any organization doing something large or small. But the ultimate idea is it helps you better plan your campaign, helps you better execute your campaign because you're thinking in a more integrated way, and ultimately helps you measure more effectively what you've just done. So hopefully you can either get more budget or more or continue to do the program.
Great, thank you, Giles.
To elaborate on that point about the UK government and their framework, we've worked in lockstep with them over the whole time period, obviously with my role at AMEC and also on the Evaluation Council. That's been very beneficial for that. And the UK government got some incredibly smart thinkers and hard workers who take evaluation very seriously. We also all consulted with many of the same academics. So Professor Jim McNamara, who Giles mentioned from the University of Technology in Sydney, has been instrumental on the thinking. And what the AMEC framework has done is it's taken the Cabinet Office the Cabinet Office's framework and just developed it a bit further, made it user-friendly by making it interactive and putting it online and building a resource centre around it. So we're expecting UK government communicators to use this resource, as it basically is just the next step in the development of their own framework. They're basically the same thing, but this is a new iteration and the slight advancement of it.
Great. Thank you, Giles and Richard. Next question, I want to start with Richard. As the leader of this effort and working with the committee and working across all of those different groups, I guess when you look at the implementation of this on behalf of your clients, what would you suggest they do as far as collaborating with their internal stakeholders in being able to get all of the information to populate the dashboard and then be able to share those results? What are some of those success stories that you've heard or seen from your clients in order to really integrate that?
Well, that can seem overwhelming to people sometimes. They think, gosh, where on earth am I going to get all of this data, and how long is it going to take, and how much is it going to cost? And the answer is that most of the information that you need in terms of some of these other metrics already exists within your organization. So you need to make friends with some people in different departments. So the web guys have got access to the own media analytics. You need to be, if you're not already, talking to the marketing guys and looking at the awareness and the attribute and the brand attribute metrics if they're appropriate. I mean, clearly it depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve, who your organization is, and what the organizational objectives are and what success looks like. Because what we're not saying is that you have to use every single possible metric regardless of those things. The clear advice here is understand what it is that your organization is trying to do. Is it just to drive awareness? Is it to drive footfall? Is it to drive share price? Is it to drive sales? And then once you've understood that, then measure appropriately, and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So don't just abandon the output metrics, the old media content analysis numbers. They are definitely starting to lose their relevance and their meaning. And I'm seeing more and more articles and thought leader pieces by people saying, are impressions the new advertising value equivalent? And in many ways, I can agree with that, because impressions has become such a difficult number to measure accurately or meaningfully, not least because we don't have access to some of the data, and other parts of data can be cheated and gained so very easily. And that's why these big, I think Giles called them vanity metrics, are losing their meaning. But they are the digital breadcrumbs, if you like. They're the trail that points, there's a meaningful metric on the way to the outtakes and the outcomes that have actually happened. So I guess the answer to your question is to look around within your organization, make friends with the people in the other departments, get the understanding and support of your line managers and bosses, and sit down with them ahead of campaigns and say to them, look, let's talk this through and let's agree between ourselves what success looks like here. What is it that you want me to achieve? Because I don't know any boss who's ever said, I want you to achieve 1 billion impressions or 68,000 retweets or X number of likes.
I think that's a great point, Richard. I think one of the things that we see with success is, and your colleague Mark Weiner of Prime Research US spoke about it for an AMEC webinar earlier this week, is setting measurable objectives. And that is one of the elements of the framework, and that's really the cornerstone of the success of a lot of programs. Because once you have a clearly defined measurable objective, then what we've seen is you can share the framework with the other divisions and the other groups where you'll be gathering information. And LEWIS has created this and implemented this in such a creative way that it is interactive. It is very engaging for the audience, whether they're part of your evaluation group or they're part of another department. And the better they can then understand and visualize and see how that data is going to be integrated into a larger evaluation, that's exciting for companies, right? It isn't just, okay, I need this information, I need this data, but if you actually take time to educate within your organization about how that's going to be used, run through the taxonomy with them, run through the panels with them, run through the grid, it's actually a very unifying experience. And I think that's a big part of the conversion for organizations, is getting that buy-in, getting that clear understanding of what you're looking to work towards with that measurable objective, and then being able to take those breadcrumbs, as Richard said, and leave that trail to what success is and how it's defined. And being able to do that in a single place, even for the most rigid silos that exist in an organization, that can be incredibly exciting and engaging for the internal audience as much as for the C-suite.
Yeah.
So,
and well, I just pick up
Richard.
on something that you said earlier, John. Obviously, I'm in complete agreement. You mentioned the importance of measurable objectives. On the Frameworks microsite, in our resource center, we link out, as I mentioned earlier, to all kinds of case studies and white papers. And basically, the best white paper on that subject was written for the Institute of Public Relations, and actually Mark was one of its co-authors. But there is a white paper on how to set measurable objectives. It's only a few pages long. It's terribly easy reading, and I'd urge everybody to go and root out that white paper and read it, because it's really helpful, packed full of good advice.
It really is.
On the microsite.
Yeah, no, it really is great. And I think the great thing that you and your team did with this rollout, Richard, along with being very open, getting a lot of feedback, working across a lot of channels of groups, is you listened and you tried to create it to be a very simple interface. So a lot of the old analysis paralysis is mitigated, because now it's just answering questions and then allowing the answers that you likely have to be incorporated into the framework to really give you that results and lay out that roadmap for you. So I know you and Giles were two of the key players in implementing that, and just well done on behalf of the industry and on behalf of the people that we're already getting feedback for that are using and adopting that model.
Well, thank you. Thank you to everybody who contributed, because it really was a big group of people who contributed over, as Giles mentioned, over a year-long time period. But it also, I think I'd like to, pay tribute to some of the great thinkers who contributed to sort of earlier versions of it, if you like. So it builds on the work that Don Bartholomew did a lot of for the social media measurement framework. So it's taking a lot of Don's thinking on that and saying, well, how can we stop looking at this in a silo now and start to look at it in a way that reflects the communications in a holistic way. But for many people over many years has played really important parts in getting us to where it is today. And what we really hope is that it's useful. It's designed to be used by anybody. You don't even have to use the website. You don't have to use the interactive tool itself. If you just use the process in your thinking and in your internal reporting, I believe we would have accomplished our mission. You don't have to work with any particular vendor. It doesn't matter if you work with Cision or Prime Research or Karma or BurrellsLuce or any of the global monitoring and measurement businesses. You can work with one of them. You can insist that they use this thinking in their reporting, or you can do it yourself. And it's designed to work for organizations of all sizes, with all budgets, with the myriad of different objectives that, of course, organizations across the globe have, and right across the world as well. And I think that's an important point, is we always have to remember that the world of PR runs at different speeds across the globe. So what might make sense in America or in the UK or in Germany or France might not make sense in India or China or Russia or Slovenia or any of these markets. So we have to, I'd like to think this is a small voice of calm on the correct way of thinking about how to do your communications planning properly, how to set those measurable objectives, agree what success looks like, and then to go ahead and prove it and tell the story around it.
I think one of the questions that someone asked is, what do you suggest when your firm is only one part of the overall program without access to all the channel data or other wider form of data? I think Richard touched on that briefly, but I just wanted to answer that. I think the beauty of this program is it allows you to step back and actually go and talk to other parts of the marketing function. As we said, webmaster or the marketing team or the sales team, and say, look, we're going to do an integrated, we've got an integrated objective that we're all supporting. And if we can present an integrated approach to this problem or this objective that we've got as a company, when we present that to the management team or the board or members of government or whoever, it doesn't matter whether it was PR or a social program or a demand gen program or whatever. It's all part of an integrated approach. So this person's asked a question. Maybe you're just sitting in, let's say, for example, the PR team. But I would encourage you to use this framework as a way to sit down with your colleagues in other parts of the business and say, right, this is our integrated approach. How can you bring me the data across this? And we can present a united, integrated campaign. And a bit like the vanity metrics, I'll doubt there will be many management team who receive a one-pager saying, this is the campaign, this is how we work together as an integrated approach, working across media, social, owned, earned, shared, etc., etc. And this is the outcome we had, and look at the great results. I don't think there'll be many management teams that will go, oh, that wasn't very well done, as long as you exceed the objective. So I would argue that's another beauty of the integrated evaluation framework, is it allows you to plan integrated programs and the metrics that are required so that you can present to senior people the value you are bringing to the organization.
Great, thank you, Giles, and thank you, Richard and Giles. I think at the top of the hour, we talked about having great programming and some found time. I want to thank Richard and Giles for delivering on the great programming piece, and thank all of you for your participation. And now we will, in short order, deliver on the found time piece. But before we go, I just want to thank you all for joining us for the AMEC Measurement Month webinar, with the special thanks to the sponsor, LEWIS, and our speakers today, Giles and Richard, for this educational AMEC Measurement Month event.